Hey guys, welcome to another Friday video. Today we're looking at an APU from AMD, the A10-5800K. So this means no graphics card. This is all integrated in the processor, and we will see what this CPU can do. It is from 2012. And we've got a couple of interesting items. So we've got an AM2 mainboard. I also finally got around to buying some high performance DDR3 memory. This one can go up to 2133. We have two SSDs, one for Windows 10, one for Windows XP. So the idea is to try Windows XP and some retro games. Maybe this is fast enough to not have to use a video card, but of course, what about Windows 10? We will try modern games like Fortnite and Apex Legends, but I also tried it as a daily driver, and I had a look at YouTube. Is the APU powerful enough to accelerate modern video content and run modern websites? And this is a very minimalistic setup. The power consumption is very good at idle, definitely impressed me. We can tell that the system does not have a video card. So let's begin by taking a closer look at all the parts. So let's take a closer look at the A10-5800K. So this is an APU from 2012. We have two modules and 4 cores, and it is considered not to be a true quad-core processor because these modules share a couple of resources. We have a base clock of 3.8 GHz with a turbo of up to 4.2. The processor is built on a 32nm process using the pile driver architecture, and it features a Trinity core. We have a DDR3 1866 memory controller, but this being a K-series processor, it is fully unlocked, so I was able to use faster 2133 MHz DDR3 memory. In terms of graphics, we've got a Radeon HD 7660D. This is a DirectX 11 GPU with 384 cores. And this is the mainboard we're using today. This is a Gigabyte GA-F2A85XM D3, and I believe this is revision 1.2, so slightly newer version. And the first impression I got was just how feature rich this mainboard actually is. We've got a total, look at this, 8 SATA 3 ports. So this is not only of interest for anyone who wants to build a minimalistic setup without a graphics card. If you try to build something with a lot of hard drives or a NAS with 8 SATA 3 ports, this mainboard definitely has you covered. We have 2 BIOS chips here. There are 4 DDR3 RAM slots. Here goes the CPU or the APU. We also have 2 PCI Express 16 slots, but this one I believe is only 4x electrically. We've got a PCI slot here and a PCI Express 1x. And yeah, quite impressed with this mainboard. It did a fantastic job. It already came with the latest BIOS, but I flashed it anyway. It's just something I enjoy doing. So on the Gigabyte website, F4E is the latest better version of the BIOS, and yeah, it features an updated APU microcode. So that's what I flashed. And yeah, also with the memory for dual channel configuration, I had a look in the manual. You always want to check which slots are recommended, and for dual channel configuration, Gigabyte recommends to use these 2 gray memory slots. So that's what I went with. At the back we have heaps of ports. We have 2 USB 2, there's a PS2 port, VGA, DVI and HDMI, optical out, 2 USB 3, gigabit Ethernet and also audio ports. Here we have front panel audio. There's a SPDIF port here, 0 port, TPM, trusted platform module connector is here. We got 2 USB 2 headers. Here's the front panel header for your case. And there's also a USB 3 header right here. And over here, I believe this is a good old parallel port. And here we have some fast DDR3 memory. So this one is from Kingston and it's rated up to 2133. So in fact, out of the box on this mainboard, it will run with 1333, but there are two XMP profiles, one for 1866 and one for 2133. It dials in all the timings automatically and also raises the voltage. So I ran a few benchmarks. This is under Windows XP. We've got 3D Mark 2001 SE, 03 and 05, and we can see the faster the memory, the better performance we're getting. So you want to use 1866 with some tight timings. That seems to be giving us excellent performance. Switching up to 2133, we do see a slight boost, but it's probably not worth finding some extreme memory in order to extract that little bit of performance out of this APU. But now back to Windows 10. So I ran Cinebench R15, we're getting 299 points, and in Cinebench R20, we're getting 634. All the benchmarks are being tested with the memory running at 2133, just so you know. And I also had a look at power consumption. So we have a Thermaltake 750 watt power supply and idle sitting on the desktop only 38 watts. So that was really impressive. So if you're looking for a low power system that idles a lot, or maybe you want to run it 24/7 or something like that, this is really energy efficient. Now running Cinebench R20, the entire system consumed 120 watts. And then I also ran the Firestrike benchmark and I only measured 110 watts. So that benchmark tests both the CPU and the GPU inside this APU, but a dedicated CPU benchmark seems to consume more power than a blended benchmark that stresses both the video and the CPU side. And I ran Firestrike, we're getting 1059 with a graphics score of 1128 and a physics score of 4332. Now under Windows 10 I had quite a few issues getting the graphics to work. So Windows 10 pulled some default drivers, but they were extremely slow. So here we have an example of running 3D Mark 05 and yeah, it just does a few FPS. So I went to the AMD website and there are two drivers available. We've got Catalyst 15.7.1 and also the Crimson Edition beta version 16.2.1, and no luck with either of them. And yeah, I have to say it, AMD does get a reputation for poor drivers, and I'm finding a lot of these legacy drivers, they simply do not install. So the workaround is to run the installer once and then you will get an error, but it will also install some chipset drivers for USB and SM bus and so on. So after you've done that, you go to the device manager and then you manually force the driver. But first I had to remove the Microsoft Basic Display adapter and then manually point the installer to the Catalyst 15.7.1 package. And after that, we were finally able to run a few benchmarks. So then I used the system for around an hour as a daily driver, did my online banking, Facebook, browsing the internet, doing a few things on YouTube, and it's wonderful for that. Sure, it's not a racehorse and it doesn't compare to a more modern quad-core processor, but it gets the job done and it is fairly energy efficient. I had a look at running some YouTube videos from my channel. 720p 60 was fine, 1080p 60 was also fine. At 1440p with 60 frames per second, we can see a few dropped frames, and at 4K, that resolution is too much. So the bottom line is 1080p material should be playing perfectly fine. And with the HDMI output, this could be a really nice media PC driving a television. Unless you have a modern 4K display, then unfortunately the APU might not be powerful enough. And now let's have a look at some games. I tried Apex Legends first. I set the resolution to 720p and all the details to the lowest settings, and unfortunately we're getting less than 30 FPS. So this is not an enjoyable experience, and yeah, it does show where the limits of this APU lies. And I moved on to Fortnite. So here we have also 720p with the lowest details, but I did change the scaling to 100%. I believe with the lowest details it uses a lower resolution scaling or something like that. And here we're getting slightly above 30 FPS. So you might argue that this is playable. In my opinion, it isn't. In such a competitive FPS game, I want to see at least 60 FPS, but at least it runs. And if that's all you have, well, it will run Fortnite. I also tried Far Cry 5. This is once again at 720p with the low details and unfortunately less than 20 FPS. So this is really a slideshow and not a recommended way to play Far Cry 5. So I tried a few older games. For example, we have Dirt 3, 720p with medium details, 70 FPS. Look at that. At first I tried ultra low details and it actually ran well above 100 FPS. So this is a game where you can actually crank up the details a little bit, and 70 FPS is extremely playable. You might even be able to play this game at 1080p with low details and still get 60 FPS. I also tried Tomb Raider. This is the older Tomb Raider, not the modern one. 720p, low details, and yeah, around 70 FPS. So it seems as if you're sticking to some older games and you're willing to play at 720p with low details, a lot of these games will actually run at acceptable frame rates. So under Windows 10, my conclusion is that as a daily driver, this is fairly usable. And if you're sticking to older games and lower resolutions and low details, it would also run a few games. But anything modern and with decent graphics, this platform is just not powerful enough. But what about Windows XP retro gaming? This platform fully supports Windows XP, so I just had to find out. So to get started, I used Nlight to build myself a Windows XP Service Pack 3 disk, including the AHCI SATA drivers. I wanted to leave the SATA controller on AHCI, and that worked just fine. I'm using a 240 gigabyte SSD. It's a Western Digital Green. And after installing Windows XP, I went to the AMD website. The latest package is Catalyst 14.4, which doesn't just install the graphics, but also the chipset driver, USB 3, and so on. And once again, we're getting an error with the graphics. So once again, AMD, not good enough. You really need to get your stuff together. If you put an installer on your website, you can't expect this to work. Not everyone is savvy enough to figure out what to do at this point. Most people will just give up and maybe not buy AMD anymore, which is a real shame because the value is terrific. So what you need to do once again after in running the installer and having all the chipset drivers installed, you go to the device manager and you manually point the installer to the directory that has the Radeon driver. And now we're good to go. We also needed a .NET package, I think .NET 2, in order to get the driver up and running. And a few other devices. I used the Snappy Driver installer Origin, and I installed everything apart from the graphics and the storage driver, just in case in the past, sometimes where I have updated the storage driver, Windows XP refused to boot, so I wanted to avoid that, and that found devices like the Ethernet, the sound chip, and so on. After that, I installed DirectX 9, Fraps, and we are good to go. For decent sound, I do recommend you go with a Sound Blaster X5 Titanium or something like that, but for this video, we're just using the onboard Realtek audio chip. So let's have a look at some games. Here we have Doom 3 with ultra details running at 1024 by 768, and the benchmark completes with 117 average FPS. So that's a pretty good start. And Doom 3 is probably one of the more demanding Windows XP era games. Even more demanding is Fear. we're running maximum details with soft shadows at 1024 by 768. We're getting 105 FPS average and 58 minimum, so very impressive. One of you out there asked me to try Oblivion, and I've got the GOG version, so I had a look, but it seems the FPS is capped, but we're getting 60 FPS locked, it seems. The introduction sequence was a little bit too long and boring for me, so I didn't get very far in the game. Hopefully what you see on the screen is representative of the game. I fear it might not, because it's inside and not very demanding though. Need for Speed Underground, a really good test for all the machines, and this machine handles it just fine at 1024 by 768 with all the details maxed out. This is another game with a 60 FPS cap, and this machine handles it without any issues. Painkiller, maximum details, 1024 by 768, silky smooth, a joy to play on this machine. And also tried good old Quake 2, we're getting 968 FPS, and in Quake 3 we're getting 638 FPS. So guys, what an interesting experience testing this APU from 2012. And in some areas it's holding up quite nicely, but if you want to play modern games, then this is not something I can recommend. So one area where this really shines is power consumption. 38 watts under idle is terrific, and if you are the type of person that has a machine running 24/7 or most of the time, then this is a really good option. It will save you a little bit of money on the electricity bill. Older games, they also work fine, be it Windows 10 or Windows XP. If you got a large catalog of Steam or GOG games, and there are some games that you haven't even touched yet from 10 years ago or so, these will run really well on this platform. It is compatible with Windows XP, Windows 10. That also means Windows 7, 8, 8.1 will run fine on this platform. Drivers, firstly I have to commend AMD for hosting all the drivers, unlike Intel, which is now pulling legacy drivers. So yeah, really disappointed, and yeah, will change my recommendations in the future whenever I deal with an Intel part from now on. And yeah, a real shame that manufacturers can't be bothered to host a couple of gigabytes for some old legacy files. At least zip them up in a convenient form and give it to the community or something, just a little bit of effort. Now, coming back to the drivers, so it's nice to see that AMD is still hosting them, but disappointed with the installer. Under Windows 10 and Windows XP, the installer did run, but the graphics portion just did not install, and I had to manually force it through Device Manager. Under Windows 10 even I had to uninstall the basic Microsoft driver, because otherwise it would not let me install the AMD driver. So yeah, and those are the little things. That's how AMD gets a bad reputation, little things like that. And luckily we know what to do. It's just a little obstacle for us. But a lot of other people that will just run the installer and get an error, they might get frustrated and never buy AMD again, which is a real shame, because lately with Ryzen they're doing really well, and these APUs are also very, very interesting, a lot more fun to play around with, for example, compared to a Core 2 or an i5 processor. We're getting a total of 8 SATA 3 ports. That is another highlight. So anyone interested in building a NAS or something with a lot of storage, this could be a really interesting platform to build like a mini server or something like that. We also on this mainboard get a lot of legacy options, serial and parallel ports, as well as PCI and PCI Express. So a really nice, well-rounded system, and I do like the simplicity, not having to use a video card, getting away with a basic power supply without a 6-pin power connector, and yeah, power consumption, very beautiful. So yeah guys, that's it. We had a look at the A10-5800K. Now I do know this processor is unlocked and you can have a go at overclocking. It's just something I'm not really interested in. I don't know too much about overclocking, and rather than, you know, giving it a go and then not really knowing what I'm doing, I'll just leave everything at stock. With the RAM, we definitely can see that faster RAM is recommended on this platform. if you've got some basic 1333 megahertz memory, you're definitely leaving a lot of performance on the table. The CPU cooler is AMD boxed 125 watt thermal solution. It's basically, I believe, the Rave cooler just without the RGB bling, and you can buy this on Amazon. I believe that's where I got it from. So yeah, FM2, interesting platform. The CPUs are not too expensive. I will put a link down below in the description for any of these parts if you're interested. They are from AliExpress. At the moment, shipping from AliExpress because of the coronavirus is an issue. A lot of my items are still on back order, well over a month. So just keep that in mind. It might be quite a while until goods start shipping, but also consider what's going on. My heart goes out to all the workers and families over there being stuck, and yeah, it's really not a good time. But yeah, it is what it is. As always, guys, let me know what you think of this solution, and keep the suggestions for future videos coming. I hope you liked it. Leave a comment. I read every single comment, and it always brings me joy reading your suggestions, feedback, and also criticism. And yeah, give it a like, share the video with your friends, and I shall see you soon with another one.